The dawn light filtered through the rolling swells, turning the ocean's surface into a glittering mosaic of silver and jade. Farther out, beyond the reef's safe embrace, the research vessel's buoys bobbed like patient sentinels on the swell, each fitted with delicate sensors and acoustic recorders meant to capture the rhythms of the deep. For weeks they had hummed with life's hidden symphony, the clicks of dolphins, the low moan of whales passing overhead, even the distant crackle of crustaceans scuttling across the sandy floor. But this morning, all was unnervingly still. Levi the loggerhead turtle emerged from beneath a drifting kelp forest, his barnacled carapace glinting with droplets of seawater. He had swum these currents many times before, guided by the pulse of plankton blooms and the steady pulse of the thermocline. He knew every rise and fall, every subtle shift in temperature, and yet the absence of the buoy's rhythmic clatter of data transmissions struck a discordant note in his brain. As he glided upward, nostrils breaking the surface, he expected to glimpse the telltale orange and white hull of the nearest buoy, but saw only the horizon's sapphire curve and an ominous emptiness where the station should have been. Levi dipped his head, exploring the water's surface for floating debris or the slightest sign of movement. A tangle of rope drifted by, thin and frayed, its fibers glistening like ghostly ribbons. He nudged it with a flipper, sending ripples across the lagoon's sheen. Below, he sensed a faint tug of current pulling him toward the open sea, an undertow unfamiliar in these sheltered waters. With a powerful kick of his hind flippers, he dived back beneath the waves, following the rope into a forest of swaying kelp. Each giant frond brushed against his sides like the hand of an old friend, but he pushed deeper, muscles coiling like springs. In the half-light, Levi spotted a glimmer of metal, a broken stainless steel frame, encrusted with barnacles, lying overturned on a bed of coral. His keen turtle eyes recognized the shape. It must be one of the crossbars that once braced the sensors aloft. He circled it, flipper tracing the outline, and felt the narrower weight of panic coil in his chest. The buoys had not simply gone silent, they had been torn from their moorings, equipment scattered like lost treasure across the floor of the sea. Somewhere beyond, currents and predators might claim each precious instrument forever. But Levi, ancient mariner of the deep, would not let that happen. He nudged the frame with his strong beak-like mouth, attempting to turn it right side up. The barnacle scraped against his jaw, but he persisted, finally leveraging it upright against a boulder of living coral. As the tide shifted, he saw more debris, a floating satellite antenna snapped from its base, twisted cabling snared in a tangle of seaweed, and worst of all, the main data loggers, rectangular boxes with blinking lights now dark, resting precariously atop a coral bommy. The stilled lights were a wound to the natural order. For humans, they were data points and vital clues to climate patterns. For Levi, they represented a pact between man and ocean, an alliance he had witnessed as a juvenile, when researchers first deployed these instruments to listen to the whale song and measure warming currents. Now, as he drifted among the scattered gear, he gathered his resolve. With careful exertions, he began nudging the smaller devices, pushing them toward the kelp's gentle hold. His flippers, scoured by years of reef hopping, moved with the patience of tides, ensuring each piece would not slide back into the abyss. Above, gulls wheeled against the dawn, their calls distant and unheeded. Beneath Levi's stoic vigil, the ocean floor seemed to murmur in gratitude, currents swirling to cradle each salvaged instrument. As the sun lifted higher, painting the waves in gold, Levi paused on a patch of seagrass, surveying his work. The buoy still drifted beyond view, silent and adrift, but he had secured the heart of the station's intelligence, the data loggers and crossbars, the precious antenna. With one last, decisive stroke, he propelled himself upward, into the brightening waters, ready to carry the first signs of hope back toward the reef and the waiting scientists. For in the deep, where silence had fallen, it would be a loggerhead's ancient courage that restored the ocean's voice. The throb of the ocean's pulse faded as the wreckage settled beneath Levi's powerful flippers, and for a moment the only sound was the susurrus of kelp swaying in the current. But above him the water's surface betrayed a new upheaval. The sleek orange floats of the buoys had broken loose from their tethers and were driven like lonely sentinels across the glassy expanse. Levi felt the familiar tug of instinct and responsibility coil through his ancient heart. These buoys were more than instruments of science, they were the ocean's voice, recording every whisper of wind and swell, every passing pod of dolphins or migrating whale. Losing them would be like ripping pages from the sea's own diary. He pierced the surface in a single fluid motion, nostrils bursting through turquoise glass to taste the salt-laden air. The buoys lay in a wide cluster half a kilometer to the northeast, drifting slowly with the ebb of the tide. Levi spotted them bobbing like castaway buoys, their sensor panel bodies turned at odd angles, some partially submerged in swells that threatened to swallow them whole. The distance was a challenge, but his flippers beat with steady power, each stroke propelling him through layers of water that glowed emerald in the morning sun. Above him, seabirds wheeled and cried, their sharp calls carrying across the water, but Levi kept his focus on the distant orange shapes. As he neared the first buoy, a small pod of pilot whales arced through the swell, their sleek backs glistening like molten bronze. They surfaced in a graceful bow, disrupted only momentarily by the buoy's unwelcome presence. Levi signaled his passage with a low bellowing call, and the whales, perhaps startled by this unexpected interloper, dove away in unison, leaving a trail of frothy foam. Levi paused to watch them disappear, heart humming with respect for their ancient kinship, then turned to the task at hand. He circled the buoy cautiously, noting its precarious tilt and the twisted cable that had once anchored it to the seafloor. Small barnacles had begun to colonize its lower half, and a tangle of seaweed clung to its sensor pods, threatening to mask their delicate instruments. Levi set to work, pressing his beak against the buoy's hull to right it, then using his flipper to gently scrub away the seaweed that strangled the data collectors. The water spilled through his flippers in a cascade of bubbles, momentarily clouding the sapphire depths, but when the buoy settled upright and clean, its sensors blinked once, an electronic pulse of gratitude that filled Levi with quiet triumph. Beyond, two more buoys drifted closer together, swaying in their currents' lazy arcs. Levi dove and resurfaced between them, repeating the delicate dance of restoration, nudging, wiping, and realigning each instrument until they stood erect like lighthouses for the unseen analysts aboard the research vessel. He lingered at the third buoy, where a small school of silverfish had taken refuge, darting in and out of the protective frame. Levi cooed softly, offering passage rather than threat, and the fish scattered in swirling ribbons of light. He took care not to scrape the sensors that protruded like fragile fingertips, and with a final, attentive push, he freed the buoy of its barnacled burdens. It bobbed anew, sensors humming with the slow rhythm of data gathering, as though awakened from a restless slumber. The current had shifted while he worked, carrying the buoys farther from one another and pulling them inexorably toward deeper water. Levi sensed the growing distance and felt time's urgency in the thrumming of his flippers. For a moment he paused at the fourth buoy, the largest of the lot, its float half submerged as it listed dangerously. This one housed the acoustic recorder, its microphones tuned to capture the haunting songs of humpbacks at dawn. With a surge of determination, Levi pressed his flipper beneath the float's lip and heaved upward, leveraging all his strength to tilt it back onto its keel. The buoy righted itself with a satisfying click, and Levi allowed himself a moment of rare, turtle laughter, a deep, rolling chuff that resonated through his throat. He gathered momentum, slicing through the water in a final rush that carried him past the now stationary buoys, ensuring they drifted along the same current that would eventually bring them back within reach of the research vessel's crew. The sea around him shimmered with renewed promise, as instrument lights beneath the waves began to blink hesitantly once more. As Levi surfaced for air, salt stung his eyes but his spirit soared. The buoys were returned to the ocean's fold, their mission restored. And though the depths still held mysteries and the currents could shift without warning, Levi the loggerhead turtle had proven that courage and care, the oldest virtues of the sea's guardians, could keep the ocean's voice alive. Levi felt the ocean's warmth slip away as he angled downward beyond the kelp forest where sunlight no longer danced across waving fronds. Here, in the twilight zone, the water took on a deeper sapphire hue, and shafts of filtered light carved thin beams through the gentle haze. His flippers moved with practiced power, each broad stroke carrying him past swarms of ghostly jellyfish pulsating in the dim glow, their tendrils trailing like living filaments. Small lanternfish darted around him, their bioluminescent spots flickering in curiosity before vanishing into the gathering gloom. Levi's barnacle-encrusted shell, once merely rugged armor, now seemed too bright against the shadowed world he ventured into, but he pressed on, guided by the memory of the missing equipment and the scientist's urgent need. As he passed 50 meters below the surface, the pressure pressed in around him like a silent weight, but his lungs, adapted over countless migrations, held steady against the squeeze. He sensed the thermocline above him, where the water's temperature dropped sharply. Here, he felt a shiver trickle down his shell, a reminder that humans had yet to tame these depths. Gradually the faint glow of surface light faded entirely, replaced by the muted gray of suspended particles. Levi's keen eyes, trained for these depths, picked out the first signs of the submarine canyon, jagged rock walls rising like ancient ramparts, carved by centuries of currents into smooth grooves and hidden overhangs. He navigated into the narrow gully, talons of his flippers grazing the coral-encrusted walls, careful not to disturb the slow-growing sea fans that clung to vertical surfaces. Ahead lay the drop-off where the primary data logger had crashed, a rectangular frame now half buried in fine silty sand at 60 meters. Between him and that prize, currents funneled through the canyon with surprising strength, swirling around corners and hurling him against the rocky ledges if he misjudged his approach. Levi angled into the current, using his broad carapace like a keel to steady himself, and nudged the logger box with one firm push of his beak. The recorder shifted on the sand, exposing its key cable connectors. Acidic coral polyps quivered in the rush but did not cling as they had in shallower water, offering him space to work. Levi's heart pounded as he plucked the data box free, its weight unfamiliar yet vital. The moment he lifted it clear of the sand, a hidden surge swept through the canyon, a pulse perhaps from a distant underwater earthquake or the tail of a passing current. Sediment roiled into a gray swirl, choking visibility and tugging at his flippers. He held tight to the logger, lunged upward toward calmer water, and kicked fiercely against the downward push of the deep. Jellyfish shadows drifted past in the gloom, and Levi's lungs burned as he breached the thermocline once more, emerging into the pale glow of the upper twilight zone. As the canyon fell behind him, Levi allowed himself a moment to breathe before the next task, and to feel the thrill of success in his chest. He had ventured into the ocean's mysterious depths, braved the pressure in the dark, and reclaimed the heart of the research station. Now, with the precious data recorder secured against his shell, he would carry the ocean's hidden voice back toward the surface, back toward the scientists who depended on his ancient courage. Levi broke the sunlit surface one final time before plunging back into the emerald embrace of the giant kelp forest. Thick stalks of macrocystis rose like living columns, their golden fronds dancing in the gentle swell, forming a cathedral of seaweed that stretched toward the sandy bottom. As he descended, the filter light fractured into shifting ribbons, illuminating drifting silt and the occasional glint of discarded equipment. Beneath him, the kelp blades swayed in synchronized rhythm, brushing against his barnacled shell as he threaded his way through narrow passages choked with kelp holdfasts and the tumbling coils of detached rope. The current here was fickle, one moment a soft caress, the next a sudden tug that threatened to pull Levi off course. He twisted his body sideways to catch an undertow that would carry him deeper, then angled into an opposing flow to slow his drift and study the murky water ahead. In the distance he caught sight of an angular silhouette tangled in kelp, the stainless steel crossbar from one of the mooring frames, its surface mottled with encrusted life. Levi paddled toward it, careful not to disturb the kelp's fragile ecosystem, and upon arriving he examined the frame, noting how twisted it lay against a rock outcrop. Thick strands of kelp clung to the bar's ends, their buoyant fronds floating in leaf-like clusters. With a deliberate push of his flipper, Levi dislodged several strands, but as he worked, a stronger current seized a crossbar and swept it toward a deeper trench. Instincts surging, Levi lunged, jaws clamping onto the frame's edge. The kelp's hold fought him, its ribbons wrapped around his flippers, tugging him toward darker depths. He rubbed his beak against the rock, loosening the kelp's grip, and then, twisting his heavy shell like a rudder in a gale, he swam upward, bearing the crossbar clear of the entanglement. As he broke into clearer water, he shook his shell vigorously, sending cascades of kelp fragments drifting back to the forest floor. His path now lay toward a narrow canyon where shifting currents converged. Here, the kelp gave way to bare rock pillars smoothed by centuries of abrasion. Levi sensed the change as the water temperature dropped, and tiny bubbles traced the movement of cold springs seeping from cracks in the limestone. He pressed his flippers against the stone walls, letting the current funnel him through the slot. The walls closed round him, and suddenly the roar of a distant surge thundered in his ears, an undersea storm of water racing through these chasms. Using every ounce of strength, Levi braced against the walls and paddled through the throat of the current, flippers cutting at invisible resistance until he emerged into a calmer pool beyond. There, on a ledge of broken coral, lay the final piece he had come to retrieve, a length of sonar cable, its yellow sheath frayed but still intact. Levi's heart pounded as he nudged the cable free of a knotted mass of kelp and sponge. The slightest pull sent pale worms tumbling into the water, but he worked with patient care, coiling the cable around his shell's raised skewts like a coil of rope, ensuring it would not slip away. Once secured, he took a moment to rest, feeling the weight of the crossbar and cable settle against his shell. Above him, the forest's bright shafts of light beckoned, promising safety and the path back to the scientist's floating station. Levi paused once more to gaze up at the dancing kelp forest, its fronds swaying like the hopeful flags of an unseen army. Then, with the gear firmly stowed, he kicked strongly toward the surface, flippers beating in measured strokes, carrying the treasures of human curiosity through the shifting currents. Each rise brought him closer to the shimmering world above, and each breath of sea breeze promised that the ocean's song would soon resume its full symphony. Carried by the instruments he had so painstakingly rescued. Levi eased into the shadowed hollow at the base of a rocky promontory where the last piece of research gear lay half buried in silt, a sleek, cylindrical hydrophone housing tethered by a length of cable that trailed away into darkness. As he neared, the water grew still and hushed, the only sound the faint hiss of his exhaled bubbles and the distant rumble of currents against crevices. Then, as his flippers brushed the sand, a slow ripple of movement unfurled across the rock face. An octopus, its bulbous mantle slipping over barnacled stone, arms waving like living fractals in the dim light. Two large eyes, liquid and curious, fixed on Levi with uncanny intelligence, as though the creature were sentinel and guardian of this submerged relic. Levi hovered, nostrils flaring in the cool water, sensing the octopus's measured rhythm, each tentacle curling and uncoiling in silent invitation or warning. The hydrophone housing glinted where a shaft of sunlight pierced the overhang above, its pale gray metal the only unnatural shape in a tableau of coral encrustation. Instinct told him that the octopus might be defending its new lair or simply curious about this lumbering interloper on his back. He pressed his beak gently against a nearby stone, steadying himself as he studied the octopus's arms, each lined with suction cups that gently clung to seaweed and shell. Slowly, Levi extended a flipper toward the cable's free end, nudging aside a swaying clump of kelp that had drifted into the current. The octopus's eyes narrowed, in a sudden, fluid motion, its body coiled around the hydrophone like a living tapestry, arms looping protectively around the instrument. A dark plume of ink welled from its funnel, a hazy cloud that would have blinded a less determined turtle, but Levi simply held position, heart thudding as the inky mist parted around his broad shell. When visibility returned, the octopus had not fled but tightened its grip, as if testing Levi's resolve. Levi spoke in the older tongue of the deep, an almost imperceptible rumble in his throat, and the octopus paused, suction cups releasing their stone hold one by one. Recognizing a fellow guardian of the sea's balance, the creature drifted aside, unfolding its arms to reveal the hydrophone in full view. With cautious precision, Levi grasped the cylindrical housing in his beak, careful not to disturb its delicate connectors. He then looped the cable around his carapace, securing it beneath the barnacles that studded his shell. The octopus watched without motion, its eyes reflecting the faint pulse of Levi's determination. For a moment, turtle and cephalopod hovered together in the quiet cathedral of the ocean floor, two stewards of a world where human instruments and marine life must coexist. Then the octopus drifted back into its crevice, melding with rock and coral once more, leaving Levi with the recovered hydrophone as its silent gift. As he turned upward, the weight of the final piece of gear resting against his shell felt lighter with the octopus's blessing. The water around him seemed to brighten, currents swirling in small whirlpools of gratitude. Levi set off toward the kelp forest above, each powerful stroke of his flippers carrying with it the promise that the ocean's hidden voices would once again be heard. Protected by the courage of a loggerhead turtle and the watchful sentinel of an octopus deep in the blue. Levi felt the weight of every recovered object settle against his carapace as he turned his flippers toward the shallows. The hydrophone, the data logger, the stainless crossbar and the twisted cable were now a motley cargo strapped beneath his barnacled shell. Each piece bore scars of its ordeal, barnacles, kelp fronds, muted dings in their metal, but together they formed the puzzle of the ocean's hidden song, waiting to be restored. The water around him shimmered with the first midday light as he pressed through the kelp forest, the long fronds parting before his broad form, guiding him toward the safe harbor of the reef. As he cleared the forest's edge, a shoal of silvery mackerel parted in rippling arcs, startled by his passage, but he paid them scant notice. His mind was fixed on the research vessel moored beyond the reef crest, its outline a slender needle of metal against the horizon. Strong currents swirled around him in the deeper channel, tugging at the cable's end and threatening to pull him off course. He angled his shell into the flow, using its broad surface to cut through the water like a keel, and kicked with steady strokes until the reef's protective barrier loomed ahead. Beneath the reef's outcrop, the water calmed to a gentle roll. Levi nestled against the coral's curve to rest and shake free trailing bits of kelp. As he emerged again into the open sea, the ship's deck came into view, researchers on the bow scanning the waves with hopeful eyes. He summoned one last surge of strength and swam toward a buoy where a small ladder dipped into the water. The scientist leaned over, arms outstretched, eager to claim the instruments. He floated toward them. With great care, Levi nudged the data logger to the ladder's rung, then the hydrophone housing, and finally the crossbar and coiled cable. Each transfer was slow and deliberate, until all the gear rested in safe human hands. A cheer rose across the deck as the researchers lifted the reclaimed equipment and carried it below to the lab. Levi banked in an arc above the ship, tail flippers steering him in a triumphant loop. He felt a surge of ancient pride. The ocean's voice would be heard again, its melodies and mysteries once more recorded for those who listened with open minds. As the sun poured down in golden shafts, Levi turned away from the vessel and glided back toward the open water. Behind him, the researchers' laughter and shouts of gratitude trailed across the waves, echoing the quiet triumph of a loggerhead turtle who had ventured into the deep, braved its darkness, and emerged victorious with the ocean's song in tow. As dawn's first rays spilled across the rolling swell, Levi felt the gentle pull of surface waters guiding him home. Each stroke of his flippers drew him closer to the reef where the research vessel lay anchored, its hull flanked by bobbing buoys now humming with renewed energy. He broke the glassy surface with a single smooth arch of his shell, nostrils flaring as he tasted the salt-laced breeze mingled with the tang of engine exhaust and the laughter of scientists greeting their reclaimed instruments. Below, the coral bommies shimmered like jeweled towers beneath the morning sun, and schools of rest darted through the emerald gardens that skirted the reef's outer edge. Levi dove again, slipping beneath the vessel's shadow to avoid startling the crew, and glided alongside the steel ladder hung from the stern. One by one, the researchers descended to meet him, pale hands extended to cradle the data loggers and hydrophones he had borne aloft. As each piece of gear emerged from the water, barnacle smooth but intact, gasps of relief and exultation echoed through the rigging. The lead scientist, her hair damp and eyes bright with wonder, pressed her palm to his dome and murmured thanks, her voice as reverent as the hush he had encountered in the ocean's deepest canyons. Watching their joy, Levi felt the weight of his mission lift, replaced by a gentle contentment. These instruments, once scattered like lost fragments of a sunken ship, would soon whisper tales of whale migration and plankton blooms, of distant currents shaping the planet's pulse. His role was done. The ocean's secrets would flow again through wires and sensors to eager ears on deck and beyond. With a slow, dignified turn, he slipped away, leaving behind the scientist's tender applause as a parting gift. He swam outward to the open lagoon, where shafts of light sliced through the water in golden columns, and turned toward the sheltering embrace of the kelp forest. There, amid the waving tendrils, he paused to nibble on a tuft of seagrass, savoring its sweet, briny flavor, an ancient recipe of sustenance perfected over millennia. Round him, the reef teemed with life, parrotfish rasping at coral, tiny cleaner wrasse dancing along his shell, and a lone octopus slinking into shadow, as if to acknowledge his triumph. As he settled into a lazy drift beneath the kelp, Levi reflected on the currents that had guided him, currents of fate, currents of purpose, and the unspoken bond between a turtle and the hands that sought to understand his world. High above, the vessel faded into the sunlit haze, but beneath, the ocean's song began anew, a chorus of data and discovery carried on the willing flippers of one steadfast guardian of the deep. In that tranquil moment, Levi the loggerhead turtle knew that he had not merely recovered instruments, but had restored the voice of the sea itself.